Captain Ted Williams.
Good afternoon. I'm Ted Williams, retired Navy captain in the Medical Corps. Joe and I go back a long ways in the Navy. We met, I think, about 1968 when I was in my psychiatric residency at the Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Washington, D.C., and Joe was working across the street at the Navy Annex. And so we would go over there, and Joe would teach us a little bit about dealing with outpatients, and rather than the hospital setting. So Joe, one of the things I remember is Joe says, "Well, never spend more than 20 minutes with a patient." I thought, what? How, what's, and what he meant was you should be able to make a diagnosis in 20 minutes and then move on to the more serious things. So when Joe and I met intermittently for years, and then when I was in the Navy, I was I was in Spain, and I had to take care of anybody that came around, and so I learned to take care of alcoholics at the Navy Hospital in Rota, Spain. Anybody here from the Navy? Yeah, great. Thank you. And so I would call Joe once in a while, and Joe would make the rounds. I think he came to Rota once with Father Martin, and he had a way about him that, as everybody will say here, of never being dull. So Joe had quips about everything. Well, when Joe eventually retired from the Navy hospital in Long Beach in 1985, I got his job, and that was a couple of years after Betty Ford was treated, so it was a high visibility job. And Joe told me then, he said, "You're getting the best job you'll ever have." And that was really true. A couple things that Joe really did that was pretty genius on his part, I think, was he started a course for Navy doctors to learn about, to be exposed to alcoholics. Back then, we didn't admit sailors and Marines to the hospital for drug problems, because, well, they didn't have drug problems, right? So nobody wanted to look at cannabis and other drugs. If you did get picked up for any drug, you were just kicked out of the Navy. But Joe was very clever in how he manipulated the Navy system. In fact, Joe, you mentioned Secretary of the Navy Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Well, that was quite a story, because when he was a resident at the Navy learning psychiatry at Bethesda, we had to rotate as residents in the emergency room. Well, I want to say Admiral, but Secretary of the Navy's wife came in, and he took care of her at the emergency room. Well, I don't know what happened, but she was very impressed by Joe. So she talked to her husband, and he became the Secretary of the Navy's personal physician while he was in psychiatric residency. So Mike Stone mentioned about Joe taking off, and leaving somebody else to take care of his patients. Well, that's what happened to the other psych residents. When Joe would leave, when the Secretary of the Navy would fly around the world, he'd just leave his patients, and other people had to take care of them. So it started some negative attitudes about Joe, but Joe knew how to work the system, and he jumped echelons and went right to the Surgeon General of the Navy. And when anybody remember Joe Zuska? Yeah, wonderful man. Well, Joe Zuska had started this program down at the Navy station for treating alcoholics, and it was kind of a clandestine type program that got very little funding. Well, Joe went to the Surgeon General and said, "Hey, this is a medical problem. We need to move it into the medical system." So they moved the program up to the Navy Hospital in Long Beach, and Joe was the head of that program for 5 years. And that program was leading in treatment of addictions, particularly alcoholism, in the whole department of the military system, and Air Force and and Army kind of tagged along. So we got a lot of visibility. And another thing that was a genius on his part, as I started to say, was creating this course. And so Navy doctors would come in and spend 2 weeks immersed in the recovery program. Anybody get treated at Long Beach? I guess not. So you've been around a while, huh? Yeah. 60-bed residential program at the Navy Hospital in Long Beach. Everybody wore their uniform. He would put the doctors into the group therapies with the patients, and the doctors would be exposed to what's going on. They had vans that would send them out to 12-step meetings in the evenings. And so that got people beyond their denial, the doctors that were treating alcoholics. Well, along with that program, which was very successful, people might call Joe and commanding officers and so forth, and they'd say, well, we think we have this doctor who may be drinking too much, and people are starting to complain. And Joe would say, well, put him in the course. So they put him in the course, and then Joe would not spend much time with him. He just observed, how Joe was really the king of observation. And so eventually about 9% of the doctors that came to the course were admitted for treatment. So I went to that course before I moved to Long Beach, and Joe would have a cocktail party at the end of the course for the doctors. So the buzz was unbelievable. The paranoia that would go in. Well, do we take a drink or don't we? It was really funny. And so everybody go over there, and Joe would just have the bar set up, and some would drink, and it was very cautious. So, well, I'm running out of time. Did anybody know Pat Benedict? Pat Benedict was an amazing nurse. I'm going to need a little more time. She couldn't come today. But she wrote a letter that she wanted me to read to you. But a bit about Pat. She was Joe's nurse when he was at Long Beach, and she was the one that Joe took out to Betty Ford's house in Rancho Mirage to detox Betty in her home. And Pat has told me stories about this, and she and Pat became a very good friend of Betty Ford's. And they both had mastectomies, and they would talk about that. And, Betty Ford did more to destigmatize cancer than anybody. And Joe did the same thing by getting Betty Ford to go public about her treatment with the Navy. So Pat was his nurse. Pat was an amazing nurse, and she traveled all over with Joe and giving lectures and so forth. So she wanted me to read this to you. I hope I can get through it. She said, living a life that matters. I worked for Captain Pursch for many years while we were on active duty and when we were both retired. I have many stories, but I will only mention one. I was the only active duty female nurse recovering alcoholic around, so I got to go many places. We were attending an alcoholic seminar in Washington, D.C. He told me that we were going to the Naval Academy for dinner. What a thrill it was to sit in that dining room with hundreds of those naval cadets. Yes, I got tearful. After dinner, we went to the auditorium to talk to the senior cadets about alcoholism. He got up to introduce me. Well, needless to say, this was my moment to finally catch him. I said, I am Pat Benedict, and I work for Captain Pursch. However, you can tell by my Navy ribbons who does the most work. Well, needless to say, that room went nuts. Laughing, clapping, they loved it. You see, I had 2 rows of ribbons, having served in 15 months in Vietnam on the hospital ship, the Repose. I had a lot of ribbons. There was Captain Pursch with just one lonely ribbon. He was sitting behind me. He crept up and whispered, "Nothing like screwing the boss on the stage." I finally got him. I thought the Navy would give me another ribbon. Working with him, he taught me many things, and I learned a lot about him. When you go, it will not matter what you own or what you owed. Grudges, resentments, and frustrations will disappear. Wins and losses that seem so important will fade away. It won't matter whether it won't matter whether I'm beautiful or brilliant. So I asked him what will matter. It's not what I bought, but what I build. Not what I have, but what I give away. It is not my competence, but my character. What will matter is not how long one will be remembered, but by whom and for what. Living a life that is something you will choose. Thank you, Captain Pursch, for being my friend, teacher, and colleague. Peace and prayers. Love, Pat.
Thank you, Captain Williams.